89% of business leaders say AI is a top priority. But with AI tools popping up everywhere, how do you separate the helpful from the hype? The right choice is crucial, which is why teams at 1/3 of Fortune 500 companies use Grammarly. With over 15 years of experience building responsible, secure AI, Grammarly isn't just another AI communication assistant. It's how companies like yours increase productivity while keeping data protected and private. Designed to fit the needs of business, Grammarly is backed by a user-first privacy policy and industry-leading security credentials. This means you won't have to worry about the safety of your company information. Grammarly also emphasizes responsible AI, so your company can avoid harmful bias. See why 70,000 teams and 30 million people trust Grammarly at Grammarly.com/enterprise. That's Grammarly.com/enterprise. Grammarly, enterprise-ready AI.
It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. The show is brought to you by CartKing.com. 877-986-7771. Have you ever thought about going into the cart or kiosk business? Perhaps the current business you have right now wants to add additional point-of-sale locations across the country quickly. Maybe the facility you manage could kickstart revenue by adding coffee, food, or retail services. CartKing.com can be the answer to your needs. CartKing.com is a North American designer and manufacturer of the finest mobile retail, coffee, food, carts, and kiosks that money can buy. For 20 years, CartKing.com has been working with clients and corporations across America to provide indoor and outdoor carts and kiosks for any application. So what you do is you go to the website, cart-king.com. You pick out which cart or kiosk you think applies to your business. You give them a call at 877-986-7771. They'll custom design it for you. They'll custom build it for you. And then they'll ship it worldwide. CartKing.com. Okay. We got a good show for you here today. We're going to be talking about D.B. Cooper. The book is called Getting the Truth. I am D.B. Cooper. The website is called RealDBCooper.com. And our guest is Joe Koenig. He's a private investigator, former police investigator, worked on the Jimmy Hoffa case. I think he was in charge of the Jimmy Hoffa case. And he's a forensic linguist, it's called. Joe Koenig, how are you?
I'm fine, Ed. How are you?
I'm good. Tell us about yourself. Who is Joe Koenig?
Well, I'm retired from the Michigan State Police, 26 years. I was with the Michigan State Police, most of that in investigations. I retired in 1993. One of my cases was the James Hoffa case, and I was lead investigator for the state police on that, and also on several other notable homicide cases. I'm a certified forensic linguist. I'm also retired from the private sector. I retired from Hartford Financial, also doing investigations for them. And I began my private investigative career in 2005 here in the west side of Michigan, starting up KMI Investigations. And I focus on financial fraud and forensic linguistics. And I've also written a couple books.
We got to have you to come back sometime to talk about the forensic linguistics and also the Jimmy Hoffa case, you know. But
yeah, I'd love to.
Yeah, definitely. What got you on the trail of D.B. Cooper?
Well, I wrote a book called Getting the Truth. That was my first book, published in 2014. In early 2016, my publisher, Principia Media, Vern Jones, who owns that, got a call from one of his editors who said, "Hey, I may have a lead on D.B. Cooper." And so he explored that, looked into it, interviewed the source, and discovered that there may well be something to this. And it wasn't long after he started, he realized there was a large amount of evidence and a lot of investigative work to be done. And he called on me to assist him. In about mid-2016, I started on this.
Why don't you give us the story of who was, for me, a lot of young listeners, a lot of kids out there.
Yeah,
Who was D.B. Cooper? I grew up knowing about D.B. Cooper, but the average kid may not.
Yeah, let me read just a short passage from my book, which is Getting the Truth, I Am D.B. Cooper. It's considered one of America's most notorious unsolved mysteries. On the night of November 24th, 1971, a man named D.B. Cooper hijacked Northwest Airlines Flight 305 bound for Seattle from Portland. In exchange for the 36 passengers, he received $200,000 in used $20 bills and 4 parachutes. He ordered the plane to take off from SeaTac, Seattle Airport, strapped the $200,000 in cash to his body, and parachuted out the rear of that plane into the dark, cold Washington state sky, never to be seen or heard from until now. So that's just kind of a very brief outline of what this case is all about. It's considered one of America's 3 most notorious unsolved mysteries.
Yeah, so basically this guy, he gets on the plane like a regular passenger. He hands a note to the stewardess, and then he demands a parachute, 4 parachutes actually, and $200,000 cash, and then he jumps out of the plane, and no one ever sees him again.
There you go. Yeah, and nobody was hurt. So it's taken on a Robin Hood type quality,
Yeah, right. And they made a couple of movies about it. You see it all the time on Unsolved Mysteries, that kind of thing. Yeah. D.B. Cooper. Let me ask you a question. But now, your suspect in this case, Walter Recker, did he live in Seattle? Was he connected to Seattle?
Well, he grew up in Michigan. He was, how about if I give you a little background on Walter?
Yeah, do that.
He was born in 1933. He joined the U.S. Army at some point. His dad died when he was about 7 years old. His dad was electrocuted in Frankenmuth, Michigan, and he grew up without a dad in the Detroit area, and had a rough childhood. But he joined the service. He received an honorable discharge from the U.S. Army. He was a paratrooper in the U.S. Army. He became a barber after that. And then in 1957, he heard about a skydiving, actually they call it the Michigan Parachute Team in Saginaw, Michigan. In 1957, there was an airport out there called the H.W. Brown Airport in the Saginaw area that allowed parachutists to jump. A lot of airports wouldn't do that in those days. And there was a group of guys, former paratroopers, most of them, who just loved to jump. And they would go up in that plane or the planes that they used frequently, and they did a lot of jumps. They did some performances in air shows. For example, the Rotary Club in Carroll in 1958 had Walt jumping out of a plane dressed as a Santa Claus to help them raise some money in a charity. He then moved. He in '61 then he enlisted in the U.S. Air Force Reserve and became a member of the Para-Rescue Air Rescue Squad at Selfridge Air Force Base here in Michigan. So he became a rescue and survival specialist, which we're told is a pretty hefty achievement, that it's a very, very difficult school to go through and survive, because they jump into freezing waters and all kinds of elements that many parachutists would avoid. Anyway, he went from that. He retired then from the Air Force Reserve. He did some petty crimes, not so petty crimes. He was arrested for an armed robbery in Detroit, which coincidentally, before he left, he gave the manager some cash from his proceeds because she was very nice, and then he was arrested as he walked to the getaway car. So he was arrested, and then he eventually jumped bail from that. And when he jumped bail, he moved to Washington. So that's what took him out into the far out west, and he got a job with the Teamsters, and eventually did some welding at the Cooley Dam. And it was during that period where he became kind of destitute, was poor, didn't have much money, and he came up with this scheme to hijack an airplane and parachute out of it.
Now, I know that part of your work here with this book, Getting the Truth, I am D.B. Cooper, and the website, realdbcooper.com, you also did a documentary film.
Yeah, I didn't. Principia did, yes.
Right. And some people came out, like his niece and his best friends. How did he tell people about this? Is that how they know about this?
Well, he didn't tell anybody about it until when he met Carl and became close friends with a fellow by the name of Carl Lauren, who wrote a book called The Real D.B. Cooper, which is available on Amazon. Carl became kind of his best friend, and Carl was kind of the leader of that paratroop team in Saginaw. Well respected, a good writer, and when this skyjacking occurred in November of '71, Carl immediately thought that was Walt who did it. But at the time, Walt he didn't know where Walt was. He lost contact with him. And they had, this paratroop team began having get-togethers up in the Oscoda area in Michigan. And it was then in later years where, in the 70s, where Carl began to ask in prying ways if Walter would admit that he was D.B. Cooper. And Walter resisted, and finally he conceded that he was. And then Carl eventually, over several years, 10, 12, 15 years, was talking to Walter about this. And in 2008, he finally got Walt to agree to recording conversations about this skyjacking. So they did it by phone. Carl is not a techie at all. He has no email, has no idea what a computer will do, probably. So he had difficulties recording this. So some of the recordings you'll hear in that documentary were a little difficult to understand sometimes, but certainly good enough. So over the period of time from 2008 to early 2009, over about 3 or 4 months, Carl recorded a series of conversations with Walt, wherein Walt confessed to the D.B. Cooper skyjacking. And then that was part of the evidence that Principia got from Carl Lauren, who lives down in Florida, and kind of is the star of this whole thing. He did a marvelous job collecting evidence. After Walt confessed to Carl, Walt sent Carl through the mail all kinds of things related to, and things, many things not related to the D.B. Cooper case. Identifications, phone books, diaries, reports, equipment, and various things that he used, like the leggings he used that he wore during the skyjacking. He sent to Carl. He said, "These are the leggings I wore." And so Carl accumulated all this evidence, and then eventually, after the agreement with Walt was that Carl would not use this information until after Walt died. Well, Walt died in 2014, and then Carl went on trying to get this story told, and eventually came to us, Principia Media. We took it, analyzed it, processed it, really gave it a close look in every which way, and I conclude that Walter is D.B. Cooper.
Okay, well, then let me ask you a couple obvious questions. Walter Recca, he comes off as a guy who's doing stick-ups, like an adventurous kind of guy. Was he also the type of guy who would pull a hoax? Was he a hoaxer, a prankster type of guy?
No. Walt spoke fluent Polish and Ukraine, and probably some Russian. He was a bright guy. Even though on the tapes he sounds fairly crude, and he was crude, but he could also be very sophisticated. Some of the writings that he sent to Carl are kind of unbelievable. I mean, it's very philosophical and uses vocabulary that you'd never think would be attributed to Walter. But no, he was pretty serious about that stuff.
And how about Walter? Walter, what's his background?
You mean Carl?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, Carl. Because he has a buddy who's a stick-up guy. You know what I mean? What's his background?
I know.
Yeah.
Carl is a commercial pilot.
Okay.
He owns and operates businesses. A very successful guy. He's written. He tried to write this book, but never completed it. And he wrote other stories. But Carl is really a fantastic individual, wonderful gentleman. One of the reasons Walt confessed to Carl is because he couldn't lie to Carl, because they had such a wonderful relationship, and he just felt guilty about stringing Carl along, and eventually said, "Okay, I am D.B. Cooper."
And you've met Carl in person?
I have. I did several interviews on this case. I flew to Florida twice to interview Carl, his wife, an attorney Carl used. And I also interviewed, in this case, there's some real good corroborative evidence. In addition to the very close similarities between how Walter describes the skyjacking went down, his conversations with the airline crew, and the evidence that he saw and left. He also gave us details about where he landed, who he saw when he landed, where they saw him, discussions he had, his activities right after he landed, and then also what he used his money for. He bought a house, for example, in Spokane within a year of the skyjacking, and he bought a house from a guy. We tracked it down. We found the guy he bought the house from, and the guy confirmed every detail Walt gave us. This guy accepted only cash. He said, matter of fact, if somebody gave me a check, I would force him to go to the bank, cash it, and bring cash back to me. So the fact that Walt bought this house with cash was not unusual. Now, when Walt landed, he landed...
No, wait. He bought a house for like $200,000 cash?
No, not $200,000.
Okay.
I forget what the value of the home was, but he bought it on land contract, so it didn't have to be recorded anywhere.
Okay.
As a mortgage or anything like that. It was a land contract, and he paid the guy cash for it.
Okay. Any indication that Walter had help in his planning and pulling this job off?
There is some discussion about, and I was about to tell you where Walt landed. He landed in a place near Cleellum, Washington, and as he almost landed, he was looking out and he saw some cars in the distance. Remember, it was late at night. He jumped about 8 p.m. In that area between 8 and 9 p.m. It was rainy, cold, windy, nasty Washington night in November. And when he landed, just before he landed, he saw some lights in the distance. When he landed, he hit a dead tree, broke his leg. Got out of the tree, took his parachute off, covered it with branches, didn't bury it, just covered it in this field, and then took his raincoat off, put all the cash in the raincoat where it was when he parachuted, but then he made sure it was wrapped up in his raincoat, and then he put the raincoat under his arm and started walking toward those lights. Now, Carl located this witness 5 years after Walt told him this. Carl, along with his son, who's also in the airline industry, figured out where Walter probably landed based upon some of the geographical information and highway information Walt provided him in his confession. So they figured out it was in this Cleellum, Washington area. And so Walt landed, and he's walking down this road toward what appears to be a restaurant or cafe. When he gets in the cafe, he sees a guy sitting there who's got a guitar and is dressed like a cowboy boots and a cowboy hat. He sits down and orders a coffee, and then he asks the cowboy, if I call someone, will you give them directions how to get here? So Walt went up to the dial phone booth that was at this restaurant. Now we know it as the Teanaway Cafe. Burned down and was replaced by a fire station. So by the time Carl gets out there in 2012, 2013, a fire station is there, no Teanaway Cafe. But everybody there remembers the Teanaway Cafe. Anyway, so Carl calls this guy, Walt calls a guy on the phone. He later tells us, he told Carl the guy's name was Don Brennan, and he hands the phone to the cowboy, and the cowboy gives the guy directions. And in asking, he says, where are you coming from? Well, I'm coming from the Seattle area. Well, you should come down Blewett Pass. And so he gives Don directions. And then he goes on, and he had just stopped there for Cowboy had just stopped there for coffee because he had a concert later that night at 9 p.m. at the Grange Hall in Cleellum there. So he leaves, goes on his way, and then Don eventually picks up Walt. Walt gives Don several $1,000s for having picked him up, and takes him home, takes Walter home to Walt's home in Heartline. See, Walt drove from Heartline, from his home to, I'm trying to think of the...
It was Portland, right? Portland, Oregon is somewhere he flew out of, right?
No, he didn't drive to Portland. He went to Spokane.
Okay.
He parked there at a bus parking lot, parked his car, because he said, if I left a car in Portland, it might become suspicious, and they might relate it to the skyjacking. So he drove to Spokane, then took a bus to Portland, and then stayed overnight at a at a restaurant, bar, motel that we're pretty sure we know which one it was. And the next day, he goes to the airport and puts super glue on his fingers to avoid leaving any fingerprints, and commits the skyjacking.
Real quick, before we take a break, that area in Washington State is so, especially back then, I could imagine, it's all woods and lakes and stuff and rivers and streams. How did he know if he's jumping out in the dark? How does he know he's not going to jump out and land in some lake?
He didn't.
Just didn't care.
There you go.
Okay.
His niece, if you're watching the documentary, his niece Lisa Story asked him, Uncle Walt, why did you do this? And he told her, I'd rather be dead than poor.
Yeah, nothing to lose.
He was desperate. He really was desperate, and there was no jump bothered him.
Don Brennan, we ever track him down?
Don Brennan has died.
Okay. But he's a real person. We know he's real.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Definitely.
Let's take a commercial break. We're here with Joe Koenig, former police detective, forensic linguistic, private investigator. Keep an eye out for PI Magazine. He has an article coming out in the next couple of months. And also, too, hopefully we're going to get him down there to Crime Con in New Orleans, June 7th to the 9th. He's be the keynote speaker we're hoping for. We're hoping we'll get him a gig down there. But until then, check out PI Magazine. The book is called Getting the Truth. I am D.B. Cooper. And there's a website called realdbcooper.com. We're going to be right back with more of Joe Koenig right after these messages.
And now a word from our sponsors.
Check out cartking.com, 877-986-7771. Have you ever thought about opening your own mobile cart or kiosk business? Perhaps your current business wants to add multiple point-of-sale locations across the country quickly. Maybe the facility you manage could kickstart revenue by adding coffee, food, or retail services, like let's say you own an office building or a warehouse. Put one of these carts there in the lobby. Well, CartKing.com can be the answer to your needs. CartKing.com is a North American designer and manufacturer of the finest mobile retail coffee and food carts and kiosks money can buy. For 20 years, CartKing.com has been working with clients and corporations across America to provide indoor and outdoor carts and kiosks for any application. From large, heated, and secure outdoor retail or food kiosks to smaller, more mobile coffee kiosks or coffee stations, coffee carts, CartKing.com designs and builds them all. Carts and kiosks are fun, and so are the dozens of designs on the website, CartKing.com. Please visit today at CartKing.com or just call them at 877-986-7771. Tell them Ed Opperman sent you and you get a good deal.
Remember, all these shows on Awake are brought to you by emailrevealer.com. You can go to emailrevealer.com and get a copy of my book, How to Become a Successful Private Investigator. You also do all the kind of different services for you. Online dating service investigations called an online infidelity investigation. And that's where you give us your husband or your boyfriend, your girlfriend's email address, and we trace it back to their online dating websites, and we return a list of all the dating sites that email is registered to. We can expand on that investigation and trace it back to porn sites, escort service sites, swinger sites, gambling websites, and even prescription drug websites, and all kinds of digital forensics, computer and cell phone digital forensics, where we can recover deleted content from an email or a hard drive and produce a report for you that you can use in court. That's emailrevealer.com, or you can contact me at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. The Opperman Report is brought to you by SubhashTechnosis.com. Subash Technosis is a search engine optimization and website design company. They're located in India, so you know you're going to save a lot of money and get top quality service. They offer all sorts of business process outsourcing, data entry, banking BPO services, recruitment process outsourcing, software testing, offshoring, research network, customer care, press release, content writing and distribution, and much, much more. Now, you can get a hold of Subash Technosis by email at info@subhashtechnosis.com. Their website is www.subhashtechnosis.com, and their Skype is ANUSHASUBASH.
Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. We're here today with the forensic linguist, private investigator, retired police detective Joe Koenig. The book is called Getting the Truth, I Am D.B. Cooper. You can check out the website, realdbcooper.com, and keep an eye out for PI Magazine because Joe Koenig has an article coming out there about this topic, about D.B. Cooper. Hey, Joe, real quick, back to Don Brennan. Was Don Brennan, was he expecting a phone call from Walter?
Well, that's what triggered that. When you said, did he plan this with anybody?
Right.
There's some indication in Walt's confession that would lead me to believe that there were some prior discussions with Don, that he knew that when he flew out of Seattle, he would jump fairly quickly, apparently. And then he knew Don lived in the Seattle area, and he would have Don pick him up. But Don didn't know when or how or where, probably, Walt was going to do this. But Walt went ahead and did it, and then he was, he's within an hour, 2 hours of Seattle, and he called up Brennan and said, "Hey, I did it," something to that effect.
Just imagine hiking through those woods, in the dark, no trails, no no proper gear, no water, no.
Well, I didn't get a chance to tell you that Carl located this cowboy.
Ooh.
And so Carl, 5 years after the fact, he flies into this Cle Elum area. And, of course, he finds the fire station, and across the street is an older auto repair shop that he goes into and says, "Hey, do you remember the Tianaway Cafe?" Sure. They remember it. And he says, "By any chance, do you know," because Walt had said in his confession that this cowboy drove a dump truck. So Carl asked this guy, "By any chance, back in the early 70s, do you remember a guy who used to dress like a cowboy and drove a dump truck?" And the guy said, "No, I don't know." But he said, "We have a town historian. Why don't you go see that guy?" And so Carl does, and the guy gives him the same story, but he says, "Hey, I'll ask my son about this. He's more likely to know." So Carl leaves his name and phone number with this town historian, and he then flies back to Florida. A week later, Carl receives a phone call, and the guy says, "I hear you're looking for me." And it's Cowboy. So Carl asks him a couple things. Well, this goes back to 1971. You're in the Tianaway Cafe, and do you remember a guy walking into the cafe that night? He says, "Yeah, I do." And this guy, it turns out, Cowboy is a former police officer. He's a highly respected guy in the community there. He was named King Coal in 2017, which is a high honor in that area for guys who used to work in the coal mines. And he's lived in that area for a long, long time. Well-respected man. And he remembers in detail that meeting. He remembers the guy was wearing penny loafers because he always wanted penny loafers himself. He said it was strange because as he was driving to the cafe in his dump truck, he saw the guy walking along the road in the rain, carrying his raincoat under his arm. And then he couldn't pick him up because his company wouldn't allow him to. And he went on to the cafe there for a coffee before he was to perform at the Grange Hall at 9 o'clock that night. So he's in there having coffee, and this guy walks in, face red as a beet, all wet, and but he remembers it very, very vividly. And he also remembers taking the phone in the restaurant and telling a guy where the Tianaway Cafe is so he can come pick Walt up. And then he said, just before I left, Walter bought my coffee, said thanks, and the cowboy, now known as Jeff Osadich, went on to complete his concert that night. He's a singer in a band, has been for a long time. He's got a couple CDs out, and he's a fantastic singer, by the way. So he confirms in minute detail, mirrors what Walt told us in his confession. And there's absolutely no evidence these two have ever met or talked or anything. He's telling us in 2013, he told Carl this story in 2013 and gave Carl a written statement. And then I interviewed him in 2017, and he's being truthful. He's a good man.
Now, when you look at the sketch, the famous D.B. Cooper sketch, and then you look at a photograph of Walter Recca, it's very similar. You can see a similarity right away. Has this guy Brennan ever been shown photographs of Recca?
You mean Osadich? Or Brennan was...
Oh, no, yeah, you're right. Yeah, the cowboy. I meant the cowboy. Yeah, the cowboy. Was he shown pictures?
Carl sent him, and Carl isn't a police officer, an investigator, or anything like that. Matter of fact, Carl's recordings where he's asking questions, he contaminates the responses of Walter, something terrible. But he repeatedly asked questions, and he actually did an admirable job, sufficient enough for me to feel very confident in the content. Yes, Carl sends Jeff Osadich one photograph of Walter, and says, "Is this the guy you saw in the Tianaway Cafe?" And Jeff said yes. Mm. So you've got an eyewitness whose details are a mirror image of what Walt told us. You've got his home that he bought after the skyjacking. That owner's testimony is a mirror image, basically, of what Walt told us. And everything else Walt has told us, we've been able to corroborate as best we could. Now, we're working off the publisher's budget. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of things I wanted to do. I wanted to hit Cle Elum hard and see if there were any citizens there who attended that concert the night of November 24th, 1971 at Grange Hall, to confirm that Jeff performed that night. We've got a letter from a guy who owned the dump truck who said, yes, in the early 70s, Jeff Osadich did drive a dump truck. And then we've got Jeff actually subbed for a guy that night at the Grange Hall on November 24th, 1971. And we've got a letter from the guy he subbed for who said, yes, he doesn't specify the date, but he said, Jeff subbed for me. So, we've got a lot of corroboration on this thing, in addition to all the forensic linguistics I did in the statements themselves.
Now, how were you able to use that?
What, the statements?
No, the forensic linguistics. What were you comparing? Like, how were you using that?
Well, that's something we were going to talk about at a later show, but
okay.
Let me give you just a little capsule, okay? Everybody speaks uniquely. Everybody speaks uniquely. And by that I mean everybody communicates uniquely. Our body language, our eye movements, the way we pronounce words, the way we pause, the way we breathe, the way the inflections in our words, the kinds of words we use, and so on. All of that is basically a fingerprint that everybody has. They have a unique communication pattern. So what I look for, I had the tapes. I had 10 mini cassette tapes that we later transcribed, and my wife had to put in well over 100 hours trying to fine-tune those transcripts so they were brought up to the standard I needed to do forensic linguistic analysis. And the analysis I did was I tried to get a calibrate to the individual, what kinds of words they use, when they use them, when they don't use them. Listening to the audios, I listened to how the people enunciate, how quickly they respond to questions. Are there pauses? Are there different pauses? Are there different pronunciations? Are there different? So I look for their communication pattern, and then I look for changes in those communication patterns, because it's in the changes where these there's a reason for that change. Somewhere there's a reason for that change. It could be they simply thought of some past event that all of a sudden distracted them. Could be a noise in the room, and one of the options, one of the causes could be deception. So I look for changes. If the communication patterns are consistent, that's a good sign the person is being truthful. If there are changes, then I have to go in and figure out what caused those changes. So I listen to the audio tapes, and I analyze the transcripts. I count up how many words were used by a particular person. I color code those things, and I've got 104 pages of transcripts on the floor down below me, all highlighted, showing different words, different phrases, and different colors. And then I look for patterns. And I look to see, pronouns, whether or not, because the pronoun I is a very specific and important pronoun. If somebody says, I did this, they did it, because they're taking accountability, responsibility. There's only one I, and they're very specific and precise. And truthful people talk precisely. Untruthful people try to obfuscate or confuse. So you use all those different things, and I analyze the transcripts looking for patterns, and I came away from all of that analysis, hundreds and hundreds of hours, feeling that my witnesses were truthful, and so was Walt.
Fascinating. We have to have you come back and do a whole show about that. I'd love to take a class from you. Just no, that kind of stuff fascinates me. You know how that is. But let me ask you this. Now, the FBI, did Walter Recker ever come across the radar of the FBI? Because you got to think, if he was such a hotshot parachute guy, he's there within 100 miles, 150, 200 miles of where he lives. Did he come across their radar?
As far as we can tell, no.
Okay.
But, some of the things Walt sent to Carl were identification pieces, KGB identification pieces, and vaccination records, passport records, showing he traveled to the Middle East repeatedly, and to Poland, and Ukraine, and all of those places. And it's during that period where Carl had lost contact with him and had no idea what Walt was doing. So it's possible there is some federal connection there in terms of Walt doing things in a clandestine way. But it's still speculation. But we do have quite a bit of evidence that would suggest that.
Right, because when I was doing research on this, one of the stories I heard, I wasn't sure if it was your story, is that he was approached by two men in hard hats, and then they offered him a job in some kind of intelligence agency. Is that your work?
Yeah, that's not my work, but that's part of what's in Walt's testimony.
Okay.
And Carl goes into that in his book, and the documentary does as well.
And the only indication of that, though, is that these passports and vaccination documents and stuff like that he provided for you?
I'm sorry, ask that again, Ed.
Yeah, in order to verify those claims, what do we have, anything besides the vaccination documents and the passports and that kind of stuff? Anything else?
Statements he made to his niece, we have those records. I'm trying to think. Now, I focused on the D.B. Cooper thing, so
right.
I'm not the best person to talk to about those items, okay?
But my concern would be, okay, if we could suspect he's exaggerating that portion of his life, perhaps he's exaggerating the D.B. Cooper portion of his life.
I got you.
Yeah, what do you think?
We found anything we could corroborate. You know, it's not like you can go to the KGB
yeah,
and
I know,
say,
yeah.
hey, is this ID legitimate?
Yeah.
Even if it was, they wouldn't tell you.
Yeah.
But everything we could corroborate, we tried to corroborate, and we did. For instance, the armed robbery of the big boy in Detroit. That's all. We got police reports for that. We've got his, he said he burned down a pizzeria place he owned in Wixom, Michigan. We got police reports on that. Matter of fact, I know some of the officers involved in that investigation after the fact. He was involved in another attempted armed robbery in Birmingham. We've got the police reports for that. So all of those, you know, many of the other things he told us about that we were able to do research on and corroborate, we got corroborative evidence on it. So he wasn't. If he was being deceptive or exaggerating, it would have to be in those areas that we've been unable to corroborate. Now, he offered information frequently in real detail, which is another characteristic of a truthful person, in that when they offer details like that, they know that at some point you can prove or disprove it, you know, with a real good, thorough investigation. Everything we could find evidence on, we corroborated what he told us.
Now, what about Walter Recca? Did he give you any kind of information, like conversations he had with the stewardess that could then, or maybe the ticket taker, or I think he bought a drink someplace too? Anything like that could be, you could talk to those witnesses and then corroborate that stuff that wasn't in the news media or wasn't in the official reports?
Absolutely. I have to hope that the FBI isn't giving everything to the public. That you know, cases are made on details. You know, that's what investigators. That's what separates a good investigator from a bad one. The good investigator will get real good details. So I have to think there are FBI 302 reports that reflect very intricate details of conversations the stewardesses had with the skyjacker. For example, Walt gives us very detailed information about his conversations with various people on that plane. And the FBI, in my book, I say, you know, I think the FBI can solve this case simply by looking at those detailed reports and comparing the information that only the skyjacker would know, and that would be Walt. Now, he smoked Raleigh cigarettes. They confiscated 8, I think, cigarette butts off that plane. Those were Raleigh filter cigarettes, the same kind of cigarettes. Now, those would contain good DNA if the agents, when they seized it, they stored it properly. Now, we've heard since that they may have lost that evidence. But if they still have that evidence, they could certainly check Walt's DNA against, those cigarette butts. But in those days, that's 1971, remember, DNA wasn't even a thought.
Yeah.
Photographs took 5 days to develop. Fingerprints, you only had, they were only good if you had a suspect. And it goes on and on. I mean, many of the tools that law enforcement enjoys today were just a dream back then.
What is the FBI's position on your conclusions and on your book?
I don't know. Now, I got endorsements from former FBI agents, agents in charge. Jim Esposito was an agent. He worked with me on the Hoffa case. He became a special agent in charge in New Jersey. He wrote a nice endorsement saying, this looks like D.B. Cooper to me. And I got another one from Kathleen McChesney, who was the number 2, kind of like the Andrew McCabe of the FBI back in the 90s. I'm not sure she worked under Mueller or Louis Freeh. It was probably Louis Freeh. But I have a wonderful endorsement from her. Police chief up in Oregon who endorses it. Federal prosecutors who endorse it have reviewed it and said, urge the FBI to review this material. So I'm hoping that the Bureau will pick up this book and run with it and start taking a close look at it and see if they can use that information to finally solve this case.
What about any investigators who actually worked on the D.B. Cooper case? Anybody come forward and talk to you?
No, I haven't. Well, my book was
just came out.
Yeah,
it's just coming
last
out
week. Yeah. So I haven't had a chance. There are a lot of people involved in this case. Many of them are no longer with us.
Yeah.
So it's getting more and more difficult to talk to people who are intimately familiar with this case.
I should have took my time before I booked you. Who knows? In a couple of weeks, they may come out and say they put a whole statement in. We're giving Joe Koeniger.
Come on with you again.
Yeah, you might come. You're gonna promise you come back. Thank you very much. Hey, so what do you want to leave us with? This is great stuff. I love this. What do you want to leave us with?
Well, it's my book is an excellent primer on how to solve a cold case, for example. It talks about biases and prejudices, and it talks about all the tools that you need to help solve these kinds of cases and how careful you've got to be. A cold case is entirely different from an active homicide case, like the Hoffa case. That happened on my wedding anniversary, and I didn't see my wife for 4 days. Wow. And I was just helter-skelter. I mean, the pressure, you didn't have time to do anything. Cold case, you got time to work it, think about it. But there are also political pressures. There's somebody paying your wages to solve cases, not to just investigate them. So you got pressure to produce. And so investigators have to really be careful about their biases and prejudices and make sure they're objective and that they evaluate each and every piece of evidence objectively. That's the important thing.
Have you written anything about the Hoffa case?
I haven't.
Oh, you gotta. That's a great story. Yeah.
Well, I've lived that case.
Yeah.
Now it's 47 years, and I'm a little tired of it.
Okay.
I'll tell you a little story that's in my book about Hoffa, though.
Okay.
Real quick. the Hoffa case, tremendous resources, police resources, were devoted to that case. I mean, it was largely driven by the media. I mean, I remember walking out of our interview with James P. Hoffa, now the president of the Teamsters, at his Lake Orion home, and we saw some lights in the distance. This was on the 31st, I think, of July, 1975. We're walking down there, and as we get closer and closer, we see a throng of people, and it turns out they're reporters with lights on. And we walk in there, and Kurt Grenier, the lieutenant from Bloomfield Township, who was the township officer, the local officer in charge, faced the media. And it was just so hectic. But there were so many resources devoted to that case that you wonder if it was worth it. It was, because we used all of that publicity and public interest to get search warrants, to get grand juries impaneled, to get wiretaps, to get search warrants, and we were able to really decimate the Detroit mob as a result of the Hoffa case. Direct result.
Oh, yeah, I can imagine. You must have been swarming all over those guys. Joe Koenig, thank you so much. Getting the Truth. I am DB Cooper. The website is realdbcooper.com. Keep an eye out for PI Magazine. And hopefully CrimeCon in New Orleans, June 7th to the 9th. Joe, if people need a PI over there in Michigan, how can they get a hold of you?
Area code 616-366-5856. And my website is www.kmiinvestigations.com. KMIinvestigations.com. Thank you so much, Joe Koenig. And keep in touch with us, too, if anything comes up next week. Okay, if the FBI gets back to you with the silver reward there. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, Ed.
Good night.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Okay, so then we had Joe Koenig, private investigator, forensic linguist, former police investigator there, worked on the Jimmy Hoffa case, and in charge of the Jimmy Hoffa case. We've got to have him come back about that. The book, again, is Getting the Truth. I am DB Cooper, and realdbcooper.com. Keep an eye out for PI Magazine. He's going to be in PI Magazine. I got a couple articles back in PI Magazine. I got to go back and find those. 21 Financial. The show is brought to you by 21 Financial. They provide unparalleled personalized accounting services to clients across New York and Houston area. From now until April 14th, their sole focus is getting taxpayers the biggest refund possible on their money earned. They're now mobile. You can't come to them, they'll come to you. With the capability to file in any state within the U.S. You can find them on Facebook or book an appointment directly through Emily. 903-265-8563, or you go to Facebook, 21 Financial. Ask for a free estimate on how to double your refund, and they can advance you $6,000, up to $6,000 on your refund. So you're getting a refund coming up. Say, hey, Emily, give me the cash right now. And they hand it right over to you. Who knows? Maybe you could fudge that refund. Right? Scam good old First Financial out of that $6,000. And it'll be out of luck there. 21 Financial, 903-265-8563. Hey, guys, if you like the show, if you like the Opperman Report, go to OppermanReport.com. Become a member. $6 a month, $20 a quarter, $75 a year. You go to OppermanReport.com. There's 200 exclusive interviews in there. That's like 400 hours. All right, of interviews. Who's working for you here? Good old Ed Opperman, man. In our members section, we have documents, scanned magazine covers, court docs, videos, all kinds of stuff in here. Exclusive stuff you won't find anywhere else. I dare you to find some of the stuff we have. It's my own personal work, my life's work here, as you can find it at OppermanReport.com. I become a member. If you want a little discount, you contact me directly, OppermanReport@gmail.com. You email me, say, hey, Ed, OppermanReport@gmail.com. I want a discount. What kind of discount can you give me, Ed? And I'll give you 13 months for $65. So you get an extra month and you save $10. And I get that money right away because it goes right into my PayPal account. And we're so broke here, that's what we got to do. Need a PI? Get a hold of me at emailrevealer.com. All kinds of stuff. Asset searches, locates, forensics work. You know, we can do the cell phone forensics and computer hard drive forensics. catch them cheating online, you give us your husband's email address. We trace it back to online dating websites. Adoption investigations, you want to be reunited from a mother or a father or a son or a daughter, separated through the adoption process. Locate people's personal current place of employment. You need to find out when someone works. You want to serve them with some papers. You want to get an income execution for child support. We could find out where they're working, find out what their assets are, find out where their bank accounts are. All that kind of fun stuff. Emailrevealer.com. Thank you so much. Thank you, Joe Koenig. RealDBCooper.com. Getting the truth. I am DB Cooper. They caught him after all these years. Walter Recker. Thank you so much, Joe. Good night.